Okay, welcome to Executive Function in Speech Therapy, Part 2. Okay, so in our Part 1 last month, we talked about executive functioning and the fact that it's the part of our brain that's kind of like the GPS. That's why there's a little GPS up there that kind of drives our brain, and it's especially important in the areas of memory, organization and planning, focusing and attention, impulse control, and self-monitoring. And so those were the major areas that we're looking at when we talk about executive function, and those are also the major areas that impact kids in school. So when we look at these parts of our brain or functions, these are really important ones. And so last time we talked about memory, and we had Ellie who had short-term memory problems and Kirk who had long-term memory problems, and we talked about strategies for them. Today we're going to focus on the last three bullets, and we have examples of students for each one. And this is kind of a big PowerPoint because I just put as many visuals in there as I could. So I may kind of go through them quickly, but they're there for you. If you have a student and you say, oh gosh, his organization is terrible, then you can go through and you can always go back. You might want to download the PowerPoint and go back to it when you have a situation and you want more strategies. Okay, so our learning objectives, I just listed, for ASHA we have to have learning objectives to get our CEUs, and that you would get 5 more strategies. Actually, I'm hoping that you'll get a lot more than 5, but a strategy for at least one new strategy for each of those areas that we're talking about that would help you increase progress towards therapy goals with your students. And then that you could identify 2 resources that would assist you. And I have a really good book I'll mention at the end, and some articles that I'll mention throughout the presentation, and I will post those so that way you have some resources to look at. And it's very important because we're talking about executive function and how it impacts a kid throughout his whole day, and not just therapy but also in the classroom, that these strategies were really developed as practical strategies for both teachers and therapists. So as we go through things today, you may say, oh well, that's not really appropriate for me to use, or I'm not going to be able to use that as an SLP. Then just kind of think, oh, but I could share that with the classroom teacher or the special ed teacher because it could help Johnny. It's just that I'm not in a position to implement it. So just to kind of keep those in mind. Okay, so we're going to start out with 2 students. You might want to jot down just a few notes about these 2 students to help you answer the question on the next few slides. We're going to do a poll. But let's assume that these 2 students also have a speech and language IEP, but also have executive function issues. Okay, so the first one is Sean. Sean likes 4th grade but is having a hard time adjusting to the heavier workload. He has a social studies report due in 5 days that his teacher, Mrs. Warren, assigned at the beginning of last week. She has asked him for his outline twice. Both times Sean told her he left it at home. Truth of the matter is he hasn't even decided on a topic, let alone draft an outline. He appears to be a procrastinator, but yet he's extremely smart and typically does well if he has short daily assignments. Long assignments with many steps are overwhelming to him. In addition, he has the ability to entertain both himself and others when he should be working. So now he's in trouble both academically and behaviorally. Okay, our second student is Julio, and he's a 3rd grader, and he has trouble keeping track of what he's supposed to be doing. 90% of his classmates know the morning routine of putting their clothespin on the lunch count card, placing their homework in the basket, taking their English books out, and editing the practice sentence on the board before class begins. For Julio, however, just getting to class with all of his homework and materials is an adventure. In his cubby and his desk, old papers and notes create avalanches of clutter. The chaos contributes to other school problems, like not turning in his work and losing his permission slips. Okay, so thinking about Sean and Julio, I'm going to ask you, what is the major type of problem for each student? Given that some of their problems may overlap a little, what would be the major one? So is it organization or is it planning? Okay, so I think we are going to start with Sean. And so go ahead and pick which one would be the major one for Sean. And then in a moment, after you've done Sean, pick which one would be the major one for Julio.
Sean was 100% planning, and Julio is 100% organization. That's the consensus.
All right. Good job. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about those, the organization and planning. So generally with organization, we see kids who do not know how to apply strategies for organizing, and even if they do get organized at once, they can't stay organized. They may procrastinate, they have problems with deadlines, organizing their space and materials, their ideas, transferring skills to other environments, and sometimes even anxiety, and just kind of stop dead in their tracks because they just don't know how to proceed. Does that sound like us at all? Just kidding. Okay, and then planning, that was the one that Julio was organization and Sean was planning. And so poor problem-solving skills, has trouble getting started, doesn't follow through. He can't really visualize the goal or what's going to happen at the end. But then he doesn't have any sense of urgency. So if something doesn't work, then it just doesn't work. And there's no sense of getting that thing done to hand in that assignment. And poor self-monitoring skills. And we're going to see poor self-monitoring skills kind of in a lot of different places. And we'll be talking about that a lot today. Okay, so what do you do for organization? Some of this, and probably the reason why I like this information, a number of the strategies I got from a book called Causes and Cures in the Classroom, and I have a reference for you for it at the end. But I like it because it's written by a special educator who has worked both in gen ed and special ed, and she's just very practical. So if you see some of these strategies and say, well, I knew that, well, just kind of think about it. It may be something you've already heard before, and it'll confirm or validate what you're doing with some of your kids. But for organization, and it's kind of a no-brainer, you develop lists, and you kind of follow some type of prepare, do, check it off. And develop a plan. And I know that sounds, again, like something we just all knew to do, but actually kids with these kinds of problems can't do a to-do list. And we've actually sometimes have to teach them it and help them plan, plan the list, check it off, plan to reward themselves afterwards. And then I like this one about check. Sometimes some of the kids I've worked with in the past make the same mistake on every single paper. Like they never put their name on their paper, or, some of these things. So make sure that when you help them develop a checklist, that you include some of those most common mistakes and that you talk about it. And that's a major thing. It's like a teaching tool. You have to teach them. And then I like this idea that not to forget technology. Because sometimes audio tape cues or timers or cell phone alarms can work with some kids depending on their age and the appropriateness. And then it's kind of a reminder to provide modeling and guidance and practice to help them with these new organization habits. Schedule a time where they work on organizing. We're going to talk a little bit about some ideas with that in a minute. And then if you can, involve the student. Maybe have several different ways of organizing information, or their notebook or their list of things to do, and let them be involved, because they're finding now that kids who can help have a choice in some of the tools that they use are more likely to use them on their own. And so here's just some examples. Actually, this isn't, I was looking for something that had the daily routine, because Julio forgets what he's supposed to do, even though everybody else in the class knows. So this is more of a schedule, but if you could envision this as more of a routine, put your backpack away, turn in your homework, etc., etc. You could use something like this. We've all seen these board maker pictures before. And you could also make it a checklist so that they check it off, or you could use Velcro, of course, and make it in a strip. Another example, I just pulled this one off the internet, and it's actually a copyrighted checklist, but you don't need that. But just some kind of checklist you can make up. So Julio would do those 4 things every morning that everybody else in his class does. And it might be the checklist might be taped to his desk, and it might be, you know, laminated, so he can check it off each morning that he's done those things. So kind of a no-brainer, but, and I like this one. A teacher used this one for writing. And there again, it kind of gives that example of the 4 or 5 things that kids tend to make mistakes on. And so somebody like Julio might need that like taped to his desk, also like a smaller version of it taped to his desk so he could check it off. Just kind of common sense things. And then there are tons of writer checklists out there on the internet, and this is just one of them that you could also use. So writing is one of those skills that seems to lend itself to a checklist. And then I liked this one for kids who have a lot of emotions and anger and tend to melt down easily, then to have something like this, you know, when I'm frustrated or angry or upset, I will choose to, and then they have a menu of things that they could do to calm down. So I like that one. Visuals are just really important. Okay, so what else would help with organization? Sometimes having them begin to keep a chart or a record of the amount of time it takes to complete assignments. Sometimes the amount of time it takes to start even an assignment. But if you work with the kids on beginning to chart that information, they begin to see that they wasted 10 minutes getting started or doing whatever, and then they lost 5 or 10 minutes for free time or choice. And I'll show you some examples of that. And then this middle one I liked because sometimes the kids who are really disorganized, you look at their desk and there's just stuff everywhere and it's a mess. And some of the stuff goes back to September and it's now January kind of things, is they don't really know how to sort. And I know that sounds funny, but sometimes they don't know how, they look at this pile of stuff and they don't know how to sort it out and figure out what needs to go and what needs to stay. So actually teaching them some of those steps can make a difference. I'll show you an example of some of that too. And then just keep in mind that sometimes kids procrastinate because they're overwhelmed and they have anxiety, they don't know how to get started, they think that they can't fix it, they can't do it. And so guided practice and a variety of problem-solving strategies can really help that, and positive feedback as well. So here's an example of trying to make a student more conscious of how much time things take. So these are classroom activities. So if you were an SLP going into a classroom, this would be a good way to help a student. Or you might have some therapy activities or whatever you want to put there on the left is fine. And to start this, you might start with only the journal and gradually build in the spelling work, the reading assignment, computer time. But we're looking at the time the teacher assigned it. So the teacher is going to have to model and help the student get started on this, or the therapist. Then what time you write down, what time did I start, what time did I end, how much total time, and now what kind of reward do I get? So many teachers use some kind of choice board or choice menu, and so they pick one of those things and they get to do it for 5 minutes. And then I just put some other things too, like maybe computer time or free time, you know, just kind of giving them several choices, but it's really important for them to see that they get rewarded after they actually complete something. And then, okay, so sorting, you know, we start over there on the left, we start teaching kids to sort objects and all kinds of things when they're really young. But we forget that some kids maybe, for the organizational piece, don't know how to do that. And then as adults, we know what to put in the garage and the silverware drawer and the pantry and whatever, but sometimes kids don't. So you might even develop some index cards and put them out on the student's desk, and then the student takes, or maybe spread them out on the floor, and the student empties their desk and puts them in piles. What is old that I don't need to keep? What is a current assignment that I'm working on? I'm still working on, I need to keep that. What is finished and I need to turn it in? What is trash? Just helping them kind of learn how to sort and giving them a time to do it in class can help a lot. Okay, and I liked this one, and this is a good article that you might want to look at, and it's called Consequence Maps, and it helps kids to see what choice they want to make. And this one is Time to Work, a Time to Work consequence map, and so Axel has some issues with that, and so you can see, it's time to work. If he does not do his work, he doesn't get playtime, and he's upset, and the teachers are upset. But if he does his work and he finishes it, he gets to play and he's happy. So sometimes some simple maps like that can really help to illustrate it. And okay, so then kind of going on to planning and problem solving. Sometimes kids can't see the goal. They can't figure out how to get started, and they don't have a clear vision of what it's going to look like in the end, what it's going to be like when I get done. And so teachers have to help kids, kind of teach them how to develop lists and help them to see, what the end goal is, and then also, help them discover that feeling of accomplishment when they finish something. They also need to help kids anticipate roadblocks. I know this sounds funny, but I actually had a student in undergraduate school that I was teaching in a class, and I gave an assignment, and I gave them all kind of like a blank PowerPoint template with 3 things on it, because I figured it might be easier for them to use that than make up their own, but they could. Well, I get an email from a student saying, I couldn't turn this in because I had technical difficulties downloading the PowerPoint. So I was like, okay, but wait, you can make your own PowerPoint. You know what the assignment is. But anyways, but that's an example of, something doesn't work, I just stop and I don't do the assignment. And then knowing how to access resources, and also, helping them realize that they need to ask for help can help with that problem solving and planning. Okay, let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we have the traditional to-do list. And again, you might have to help the student brainstorm a list of steps for the project, create the checklist or work plan, go over it, update it with the teacher as needed, check off as things are completed, reward for completion of steps. Now, I know in therapy we don't often assign them projects, but that might be a thought. If you have a really disorganized kid who can't plan ahead, you might want to find a little project that you want them to do and kind of work on some of these skills. Here is one, I liked this, where they were helping the student plan for a social studies paper, and they planned out the steps. So they're going to brainstorm today for at least 3 minutes. We're going to find 2 articles today for 15 minutes. We're going to go in the media center and look at journals, read articles, take notes. Tomorrow, note cards, put note cards on the computer, or fill out note cards on the computer, and then decide what else I need. So you can see it helps like prepare for the whole week, kind of what the student is going to do, and then there's a list of what materials they need. The only thing that's missing here, I probably would like a column where they check it off, but it is a good example of how to help them plan for something. I liked this one. This is trying to get students to move into self-monitoring, and in this one the student had to break their assignment into chunks, and start the assignment within a minute, and then estimate the time for the first part, the second part, and the last part of the assignment. Now this could all, these could be more specific, and you could help them with defining what the first part and the second part and the last part are. But they have an estimate, and then they have the actual time it took. And then they, at the bottom was the work completed. So, these can be customized depending on the student. Okay, so some more strategies for planning and problem solving is kind of working on how to get things started. Start tasks that are concrete and challenging but doable. Then help them to develop, to realize what you need to accomplish, when will you have it completed, what steps do you need to take right now. Helping students set clear goals can really help. And then continue to develop self-monitoring, looking at checklists and rubrics, helping them self-evaluate, build step-by-step plans, and when they complete parts of the plans, they get a reward of what we were looking at a few minutes ago. But the whole idea is to build responsibility and independence eventually. And then I kind of liked this little acronym: see your goal, understand the obstacles, create a positive mental picture, clear your mind of self-doubt, embrace the challenge, stay on track, show the world you can do it. Okay, so here's some more examples, just kind of variations of charts. This is another one for a long assignment or a project. Brainstorm the ideas, gather resources, develop an outline, complete steps 1 and 2 on the outline, steps 3 and 4 on the outline, and then what time did you start, when did you end, how long did it take you, check it off that you did it, actually put the date it's due and check it off, and then you get a reward. So a lot of kids need the steps broken down. And there are more and more long assignments now with the kind of standards that classroom teachers are using. Okay, some other just examples, and actually Google Images is a good place to go to just kind of search for examples of different checklists. This one's about staying seated on task and following directions, and again, building that self-awareness and self-monitoring skills. Okay, so let's go to the next student. Now we're going to look at a student named Lance. Lance has always had a hard time concentrating, but 5th grade work is proving to be even more of a challenge. When he thinks the presentations and the reading assignments are uninteresting or too challenging, Lance either slinks quietly into the happy place in his head or creates his own fun by disrupting the class. Fooling around reduces his frustration and boredom, but results in poor grades. His lack of focus on rules and procedures leads him to blurt out answers or talk excessively and makes him a frequent flyer to the office. Why do the teachers have to talk so much and give so many boring assignments? Lance used to like school, but now he hates it. There is just too much reading, and he isn't any good at it. And this kind of, as we read through this, reminds me of Charlie Brown, the Charlie Brown comic strip, and one of the kids who always was listening to the teacher, and he heard wah 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 wah. But when he has to read, it seems as though his mind keeps drifting in and out. He sounds like a fluent reader, but when he comes to the bottom of the page, he doesn't have a clue about what he just read. Every day, Lance has intentions of listening and more closely, listening more closely and doing better work, but his priorities seem to turn on a dime. And then there he is in the office again. Okay, so let's think about Lance a little bit. So kids who have poor attention and focus have difficulty relating to new things. Sometimes they can not connect the new information to their prior knowledge or what they already know. Sometimes they don't see the personal importance of doing this task. Sometimes they can't close out the distractors, and sometimes they feel stressed. They don't know what to do or how to start on something. Sustaining focus, they tend to have poor endurance. They can't break the large tasks into manageable chunks. They may be overwhelmed when there are too many tasks or too much information given at once. They cannot work for long periods without a break. They have trouble self-monitoring their on-task behavior. They also might have poor transition skills. And we see some of these in kids with autism, but they may lack flexible thinking. They may have stress from fear of failure or consequence because they failed a lot. They may have difficulty setting goals and priorities. They may not be able to use self-talk to plan before acting. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but a lot of us use self-talk with, it's not like anyone taught us how to do it, but we go over in our head, what we're going to do next, and it helps us. We almost rehearse sometimes. Sometimes we say, we give ourselves a pep talk. I'm going to do this okay. I'm going to be okay, before we do something. And they're finding that some kids with executive function problems don't have that self-talk that we have. They may have difficulty stopping one task to start another. You see that. And difficulty adjusting to a new situation. Okay, we're going to have a poll on Lance, but we're going to learn a little bit more about some strategies and then take a look at Lance. So don't forget about him. Okay, so first thing you need to do if we have focus and attention issues is establish a focus. I know that sounds like a no-brainer too, just very practical, but you want to put a spotlight on the purpose. What are we learning today? Why is this important? Really define it, not just expect them to walk in and learn whatever you're presenting. You might need to help them connect new information to prior knowledge. You can use advanced organizers or a KWL or a real-life activity. And sometimes you have to make it personal. Help them see the personal importance of learning this information. Make it relate to their personal interests. Have them give them choices, so that helps them to focus. Also the positive reinforcement and feedback. And try to inhibit distractions, work time with short breaks. And then sustaining the attention. First we get them to focus and we want to sustain it. In her book, Cyril says, don't lecture for more minutes than your student's age. So that's hard to think about, but without stopping to involve them in active reflections or processing activities. So variety of styles. So what she recommends is really that you mix up the activities with the listening or the lecture. So they have to listen, then they get to talk to their partner about it. They listen, then they draw an example. They listen, then they read and they discuss. And then they listen and they summarize. Or they listen and then they do some kind of movement in an activity. So that you're mixing it up and they're not just sitting there the whole time listening to lecture, which we know they can't do. But I didn't ever think about the fact that their age may be a guideline there. And then begin to develop their self-monitoring skills so that they can chart their on and off task behavior. And once they become more aware of it, then it's easier to come up with solutions and guidance. Okay. So here's an example. You may have heard of a KWL chart before. I just pulled this one off the internet, but generally the K is what I already know. So that would access their prior knowledge of the topic. So you're introducing a new topic, you bring out the KWL chart. You could just draw it on a whiteboard too. The W, here they say it's what questions you expect to have answers, but I've always heard that the W stands for want. What do you want to learn? But you could use it for either. And then the L, you go back after you've read something or learned about the topic, what did I learn? So all of those, can help with the focus and attention. Other things that help with focus and attention are graphic organizers, because they take all the information and they put it all together in one place. And for distractible kids with trouble focusing, practicing, it's a really good tool. And I'll show you some, but I know they're all over the internet. It's very easy to find some that you may want to use. I also like to recommend foldables because they make it interesting. You know, it's fun to make them, and then they're interacting with the words in the paper, and they can often draw pictures, and they're doing something with their hands, and so that helps to keep that focus and attention. So when you're teaching something that's kind of thought-provoking or it's hard to concentrate, it's heavy-duty comprehension, think about bringing in a foldable. And those are just some good examples. Again, you can also find them on the internet, flip books and things. Here's an example of a graphic organizer. I've used this one a lot. 3 things I discovered or I learned about the topic, 2 facts I found that were most interesting, 1 question I'm still wondering about, and 1 unusual photograph or illustration. So if we read a story or read something on a topic, in therapy even, this would be a good one to use. And again, you might fill that out, you may in steps. You probably wouldn't do it all in one day, but you might, you know, do parts of it over a couple of days. This is an example of a self-monitoring chart, and this was for kind of directed at Lance, but the time period over there actually could be first period, second period, third period, fourth, or you could just put math, science, social, you could put the subject there. And then if you wanted to break it down, it's also possible that you might break it down into 10-minute intervals or, you know, 15-minute intervals during one class period, so that's also possible. So there's a lot of different ways you can use that time period. But then Lance has to go and check off whether he was on task or off task. And if he was off task, why? And so now he begins to understand, or begins to, you know, kind of self-evaluate and self-monitor. Well, I didn't understand the assignment. So to begin with, you might use something like this, but eventually you're going to want another column with a solution. So what can I do next time that would be better? Ask the teacher what the assignment is or whatever. So anyways, you have to start small and then build on those. And then I just want to remind you, I think we looked at this last in part 1, but another example of a graphic organizer, and this one's great for narratives. You're doing stories. It's just great to have all the information, the most important information, all on one page. And you can have the kids draw the pictures. I lifted those from a book, but from the actual book. But when I use them in therapy, we draw the pictures together, and I often use it on a whiteboard. But then I use it for all different kinds of narrative activities, story retelling, and comprehension, so that they comprehend the story. Concept maps is also another way to get that comprehension in, get that attention and focus by having all the information in one place. Makes it easier, or the most important information in one place. Okay, so continuing to build on these strategies for focus and attention, sometimes kids need transition signals or visual cues, or they need something to help them learn the routine and maybe possibly even redirect their thinking. So if we have kids, it's not always just kids with autism, but it could be. What can we do to reduce the stress of transitions? We might have a timer, we might have a card that we put on the student's desk indicating it's time to change. We might have visual steps, like using the board maker pictures and go through the, you know, visual agenda or to-do list. But it's important for some kids that we teach these steps and use that strategy to help them successfully navigate a transition. And sometimes we even need it in therapy. Sometimes kids do better in therapy if we give them like a visual list of what we're going to work on today. And after we do this one, then we go to this one. So those kids who get stuck on an activity, using that visual helps move them to the next one. Okay, so here's just an example. Someone's daily schedule. I kind of don't like this one all that much, but just an example of, I arrive at school, I check in, I do my reading, I do my writing, and then it also helps if we have a person with kind of rigid thinking, if there's a change in the day, because then you can point that out. So just an example of a schedule. And then I liked it. This article by Rafferty talks about teaching students to self-monitor, and it even talks a little bit about who's ready to be taught to self-monitor, because some kids aren't quite ready or not quite there yet, and so there's actually a checklist of things you should consider. But this was a teacher who had a lot of kids with autism in his language arts class in high school, and so even in high school he put up a visual schedule for the day. So when we come in today, we're going to do sustained silent reading, and then we're going to read from our novel, the class novel we've been working on, and then we're going to do a writing assignment. So for the kids with autism, he saw big improvements in their ability to transition from one activity to the other, and also to complete assignments. So that's an interesting article, and I'll post that up there on the resources tab. I'll give it to Lydia to post. Sometimes they need visual cues. Sometimes we talked a little bit about that, how sometimes kids get stuck. Something goes wrong and then they have to do something. They can't just sit there. So this is Connor's checklist. So first, if I need help, I should do these things. I should check the directions. I should ask a friend. And then if I can't still figure it out, I need to ask the teacher. So that was another good article, or good example of a checklist using visual cues. Okay, so now we are ready for the poll. So thinking about Lance, who remember when he reads, he doesn't really comprehend, his mind goes in and out. If the teacher talks too long, he can't focus or attend, and his mind goes in and out. And then to top it off, he gets in trouble because he blurts things out, and he can do things to make the rest of the class laugh. So he's in trouble in a number of different ways. Okay, so here are four strategies, and we want to do a poll and ask you, which one do you think is the best strategy for Lance? Mix up those strategies and activities to keep him engaged. Like we talked about, listen, then do this, listen, then. Or use visual schedules and checklists to keep him on track. Make sure to gain his attention before giving directions. Help Lance develop charts for self-monitoring on his task behavior. Okay, so we're going to vote and see which one we think is the best. So you can just use the number, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, so use visual schedules and checklists was the most popular. And then next was number 1, mix up the strategies. And then number 4, help him develop charts for monitoring. And I like that because, truthfully, make sure you gain his attention before giving directions. We probably all tried that a million times, and that didn't go too far. So, okay. So I like the visual schedules and checklists. That sounds good. Okay, so the last part of our evening together is to look at impulse control and self-monitoring. Okay, here we have two students. We have Melissa. They're both middle school students, by the way. I forgot to put that in there. Melissa is an intelligent student who frequently makes announcements like, "This work is pointless, so why do we have to do this garbage?" And she says that in front of the class. As she taps her pencil on her desk, she refuses to do homework. Melissa is a master at pushing teachers' buttons by arguing and challenging their authority. And she basks in attention as 25 pairs of eyes watch her do it. This is a girl with a high desire for power and control who, when asked why she reacts the way she does, isn't sure. She has an answer that makes sense even to herself. Derek, on the other hand, shouts out answers and cracks jokes constantly. And he's in the same class as Melissa. Poor teacher. And Derek is totally unaware when he has gone too far. If someone cuts in line in front of him, a shoving match is bound to follow. When he is unhappy about not being the lab group leader in science, there's a predictable outburst of temper followed by genuine confusion about why he is in the principal's office. Derek is a good-hearted, fun-loving student but he goes with the first thing that comes into his head and rarely can anticipate the consequences of his action. Okay, so both of these kids have some issues and could be challenging. Okay, so what we would like you to do is we're going to have a poll now, and I think, Lydia, didn't we say you have to vote on it? Do you vote for Melissa first, and then you vote for Derek? Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
You can do it like that. We can do Melissa first and then Derek.
Okay. It's kind of like we did with the other two.
Yeah.
So pick the one. You know, actually they overlap. So they do have more than one, but pick the one that you think is major. Does Melissa, for example, have difficulty noticing and interpreting other people's body language accurately and adjusting responses appropriately? Does she have an inability to pick up on expectations and feedback? And feedback causes students to overstep both school and personal boundaries. Does she need help in managing anxieties, articulating feelings, and using self-calming techniques? Does she need help in learning to use self-monitoring and corrective feedback to learn from her mistakes rather than repeating them? Does she need help to become aware of what triggers fits of anger? And then do the same thing for Derek. So the 50% of people said that Melissa needs help in managing anxieties and articulating feelings, using self-calming techniques. And I think that's a good one for her. And then she does need to be better at picking up expectations and feedback, and she is sometimes overstepping school and personal boundaries, especially with their teachers. And then self-monitoring was the lowest. Okay, so now we will go ahead and do Derek. Pick one for Derek. 43% said that he needs help in learning to use self-monitoring, I can't read that, and corrective feedback to learn from mistakes rather than keep repeating them, and I think that's a biggie for him. And then 29% said number 3, help managing anxieties and self-calming techniques. 14% said needs to become aware of what triggers his anger, which is very appropriate because he doesn't really know. And actually, if we go back and look at number 1, we didn't rate that as the biggest thing, but actually both of them have some trouble with that, noticing and interpreting other people's body language and adjusting responses. So many of these things that we just looked at are some things that we could work on in therapy, especially the body language and picking up on being able to talk about their feelings using that self-calming techniques. So you all did great. All right, so let's talk a little bit about strategies for this one, and then we will be finished. Okay, so when we talk about poor impulse control and self-monitoring, there's that inability to delay gratification. Especially with Derek, we saw he reacts without thinking, before he thinks. Sometimes can't distinguish feelings from actions, just reacts. Might need more attention or a higher level of stimulation, unable to use self-talk to calm down, trouble internalizing rules and procedures. And then being able to cope with anger and frustration, that middle column. Sometimes kids like that feel discouraged or helpless, like they're not learning from their errors or their mistakes, and they can't figure out how to fix them or make things better, so they feel like it's hopeless. Trouble articulating their feelings, avoid situations that are too difficult or boring, can't identify what triggers or causes the stress, does not know how to gain power or gain attention appropriately. Melissa shows some of that. Retaliates for perceived mistreatment. Derek shows some of that. And then last column, adjusting behavior to a situation, not aware of how their own behavior affects others. Um, Melissa with the teachers and Derek with other kids, they shove him, he shoves them. Unclear about expectations or goals, does not pick up on feedback indicating a change in behavior, cannot accurately predict consequences, unable to use past experiences and mistakes to self-correct. Okay, so what are some strategies for that? Cyril in her book talks a lot about teaching or building the language for managing emotions, that a lot of kids need work on vocabulary. They actually don't have the right vocabulary to explain how they're feeling. So working on that, working on some vocabulary that has to do with feelings and thoughts and frustrations and emotional type words can help students, and once they have that vocabulary, they begin to recognize the emotions and they become more aware of body signals. And then when we talk about body signals, Cyril talks about using to brainstorm a list of unconscious physical signals that happen when you go from feeling relaxed to angry. Like your breathing gets harder, your muscles tighten, your face gets red, your stomach has a knot, your voice gets louder. So kind of helping them to realize the physical aspects of being upset or having emotions. And so I'll show you kind of some ideas from her about that. And then beginning to identify triggers. What happens that triggers that feeling? You know, that maybe it's a feeling of hopelessness or a feeling of frustration, and being able to identify triggers or things that tend to make you upset is really important. Then you can be able to talk about them and figure out how to improve them or problem solve them. So each of these, I put them all on one slide to be, faster about this, but each of these slides could be by themselves, each of these rows, I should say. But the vocabulary continuum, she talked about, you might start with the word contented in the middle and have them generate 2 words that progressively become more unhappy and 2 words that become more happy. And just begin to learn some new words that describe your feelings and talk about it. And then the emotional continuum, with the words, you would also pair the physical aspects of how you feel, and whether that's, breathing relaxed, oh, I'm relaxed, and then as I get upset, this is how it changes. And then for the triggers, talk about some things that could happen and pair it with a picture. Now, this says extremely negative and extremely positive. You could use different words in that, depending on your kid's age level. But talk about situations. So I just lifted this off the internet, but for some situations, I don't really know what those pictures have to do with anything. But Hank is making fun of Ian. How does Ian feel? And so you go back and you talk about the emotions. You're looking at the faces down there at the bottom. Or, you can use these to get the discussion going, and then you come up with some of your own that relate to each student and how they feel. And so you start that discussion, you get them to start realizing more about their emotions and how to talk about them, and then eventually what to do about them. Now I like this one. This is also from the Consequence Maps article, and this kind of plays out. Axel does have autism, and Axel, when he gets upset, he says bad words and he takes off his clothes. And so, and then if he's really upset, sometimes he hits people, throws things, and then if he does not calm down and he stays angry, everyone's upset and unhappy. Or Axel could tell an adult that he's mad. He could use the calm down technique or the calm down schedule, whatever they use with him, and then he calms down, he feels better, and he and his teachers are happy. So it's a really good article to take a look at, and the visuals really help. It's kind of like a social story in a way, except for the consequences, and there are social stories. I just put one quick one up there, but I know they're all over the place on Pinterest and on the internet, and I usually like to make my own and not, I might look at somebody else's, for example, but this one's about how to not interrupt. And so a social story would be a great way to teach kids about not interrupting and blurting out. And some of you mentioned that was one of the behaviors that really drives you crazy. So it may be that this could give you a jumping off point to develop a social story and start teaching them about, you actually have to teach them step by step, not what not to do, what to do. Okay, and then here's another social story about calming down when I get upset. And it goes on. I just put the first page up there. Looks more like a traditional social story that I've seen. And then the last part of this, we're rounding or closing down now, is looking at some more strategies, kind of thinking about this technique that Searle calls anchoring, when you look for emotions and things, and you kind of discuss what triggers them and how that applies and to you in personal contexts or school or social situations, and you begin to talk about your triggers. So it kind of goes back to that other continuum we looked at with the faces, but you begin to talk more about it. For example, does popcorn trigger an emotion for you? When you smell popcorn, what do you think of? You think of the movie theater, et cetera, et cetera. And so you start to talk about some things, images, people, tastes, smells, and sound that elicit strong emotions. And anyway, so this is all kind of teaching kids how to control or understand their emotions and what triggers a difficult time. And then they kind of talk about an emotional hijack, that sometimes something happens and it just takes over your brain or hijacks your brain and you react. So when you start feeling yourself do that, like when someone pushed Derek in line, then you need to start taking your steps for self-calming. These are just some examples. I've seen others for other kids. Remove yourself, breathe, think calming thoughts, relax your muscles, practice. We saw that little checklist for calming techniques too with the pictures. And here's another one, circle time choices sort, but it also could be a choice for calming techniques. And you might need to sort these out. This might be too many for some kids, but talking about how you make good choices. And so there's some examples. Okay, and then sometimes you get a mental hijack by the language you tell yourself. Like you say, this is hopeless, I can't do it. So then you try to reframe it and teach a new story. What could you say instead? And I always think this is interesting because I was thinking about, there have been many times in my life where I had to do something difficult, and I did use self-talk to get myself through it. I know this is going to be okay. I'm going to get through this. And they often can't do that, some of these kids. And the first thing they think is, I can't do it. So beginning to give them some language. They haven't developed that language like we do. Beginning to give them some language that they can do that. And then again, continuing to develop that self-monitoring so they can see when they're making a mistake, what they're doing, and sometimes charting it, teaching them to develop that. And so these are our last couple of strategies to show you. So just kind of thinking about that self-talk, what thoughts and behavior and consequences, how self-talk can really influence that in each situation. So kind of like, what can I say to myself? Instead of, I'm not good at this, what am I missing? I'm awesome at this. I'm on the right track. I give up. I'll use some of those strategies we've learned so you can see the rest, but just kind of thinking of some things that we could teach them, some language we can teach them that would help them talk themselves into a more positive frame of mind so they could do something good. And then here's some negative self-talk to positive self-talk. You could set it up this way. Okay. And then here's a sample self-monitoring chart. And this is similar to some of the other ones we were looking at. So what was I doing? Listening to a lecture. Turned out pretty well. I could have been daydreaming or taking notes, but I didn't. And next time, I'm going to use these split pages notes. They're easier to read. So kind of helps with self-monitoring. And then cartoons are helpful to really point out what happened. I like the one over on the right. I'm bored. I love talking about suspension bridges. So really helping kids see the other perspective, you know, what people are thinking, and then again that brings up behavior and emotions. And then I like this one because here we have a student who's interrupting the teacher all the time and correcting the teacher's spelling there, but other interruptions, and being able to put out, even with just stick figures, so that you can lay out the situation and people can see what the emotions are and what they need to do. Okay. Power cards. Another way, and these are small and they're actually commercial. You can buy them, but you could also make them really easily. When I'm angry, I use the anger rules. I don't hurt others. You don't hurt yourself. You don't ruin things. I can calm myself by deep breathing, giving myself a break, punching a pillow. And so these little cards can be in their desk. They can be on a ring, and they're there when they need them. And again, it gives them language and things that they should do when they're upset and they're getting an emotional hijack. Okay. So I'm not going to go into this one. These are some more steps about self-monitoring, and it's also in that article I mentioned to you, but something to think about when you want to try to set that up. And then couple last examples of self-monitoring card. At this moment, am I doing my work? Yes, no. So it can be as simple as that, or you could actually have kids graph it. How many problems did I do correctly? You know, so for older kids or for an elementary student, color in the stars to show how many problems she did correctly. So there's a lot of ways to teach that. That's a really good article for that. Okay, so last thing as we're ending up tonight is just to remind you that you're not alone, that you have resources in your school. Connect with them, connect with the teachers and special education folks in your school. There's a tool called the Functional Behavior Assessment, FBA, and the Behavior Intervention Plan, and any student who has significant behaviors should have one of these or maybe having one developed, and that's a great thing for you to read. It'll give you a lot of information and also how to handle the best way to handle the behaviors. So make sure you're aware of that if any of your kids have it. The resource book I mentioned, Causes and Cures in the Classroom, has a lot about executive functioning and managing behavior and strategies. And then there's references that we'll post, and several of the articles I just mentioned to you, I'll also post those, and a couple websites. Okay, I think we are at the end,